The night Atlanta drowned in rain, Ethan Cole stood alone beneath the broken glow of a streetlight, watching the city weep with him. Thunder rolled across the skyline like a wounded god. His umbrella lay forgotten on the sidewalk, overturned by the wind. Water streamed down his face, cold and merciless, yet it could not numb the ache that had lived in his chest for 278 days. The exact number since the crash that stole his wife and their unborn child. He used to believe that pain dulled over time. It didn't. It only learned how to breathe beside you. And somewhere between one lightning flash and the next, he heard it. A woman's voice, soft and trembling, singing through the downpour. Not a song of joy, but of survival. That's how it began. The night a billionaire knelt beside a stranger in the rain and found a reason to live again.
If stories of love, loss, and second chances move your heart, stay close. Every voice, every like, every word you share helps stories like this one keep breathing. So if you feel something stirring inside you right now, don't let it fade. Let's walk through this rain together.
Ethan's steps slowed as the melody grew clearer. A lullaby. Faint. Spanish. The kind his wife Elena used to hum when she felt their baby kick. His throat tightened. No, it couldn't be. His mind was cruel enough to replay memories, but not to conjure ghosts. Across the street, under the cracked awning of a closed pharmacy, a young woman sat curled against the wall. Rain poured through a hole in the tin roof, soaking her threadbare jacket. In her arms, two infants, twins, wrapped in mismatched blankets. She rocked them gently, whispering between tears, "Shh, my loves. Mommy's here." Ethan froze. Not because of pity, but because of recognition. The grief in her eyes was the same hollow, echoing grief he saw in the mirror every morning. She looked up as headlights splashed over them both, and for an instant their worlds collided. Her gaze was steady, even through exhaustion. The kind of strength that only desperation for another life could give. "Please," she called out, her voice nearly drowned by rain. "I just need enough for formula. My babies haven't eaten since morning." Most people passed without hearing. Those who did pretended not to. But Ethan couldn't walk away. Something deeper than reason, older than logic, pushed him forward. When he reached her, she flinched, clutching the children closer. "I'm not asking for much," she said. "Just a few dollars. I'll find work tomorrow. I promise." Her name, he would learn later, was Amara Johnson, 27 years old. Once a nurse's aide at Grady Memorial, now homeless after her boyfriend threw her out for raising children that weren't his. But in that moment, she was simply a mother in the rain. Ethan knelt in front of her, his expensive suit already ruined. "What are their names?" he asked softly. Her lips trembled. "Malik and Micah. They're beautiful," he whispered, meaning it. The babies stirred, their tiny faces turned toward him, blinking against the rain. He had forgotten how small life could be, how fragile. "Where's their father?" he asked, before realizing the cruelty of the question. Her expression answered for her. Gone. He looked down at his shaking hands. Hands that once built an empire, but couldn't save a single soul he loved. Maybe this was his punishment. Or maybe, just maybe, this was his redemption. Amara's voice cracked. "The shelters are full. I tried. I did. I just need them to eat tonight." Ethan's chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. The sound of the rain merged with the pounding of his heart. And then, as lightning tore across the sky, he heard himself say words he didn't recognize as his own. "Come with me." She stared at him as if he were mad. "What?" He swallowed hard. "You and the babies. I can help. I have a place, food, warmth, whatever you need." "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," he said, his voice breaking. "It's purpose." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, as thunder cracked again, Amara's shoulders slumped. Exhaustion, surrender, trust. She nodded. Ethan took off his coat and draped it over her and the children, shielding them from the rain. When her hand brushed his, something electric passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. The unspoken understanding of two souls who had already lost everything and somehow were still alive. Together they walked through the storm, the man who had everything except meaning, and the woman who had nothing except love. And though neither of them knew it then, that night would become legend in both their lives. The night a broken man and a desperate mother stepped out of the rain and into destiny. The rain did not soften as they moved, it thickened. Sheets of silver turning sidewalks into mirrors where the city's lights bled and blurred. Ethan kept his coat around Amara and the twins, one arm a barrier against the weather, the other guiding her toward the parking deck where his Tesla waited with its quiet, obedient glow. The elevator sighed open, warm air meeting their damp clothes, and for the first time since she'd looked up from beneath the pharmacy awning, Amara allowed herself a breath that didn't scrape on the way out. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not suspicion, exhaustion. The question of someone who had learned that kindness often hid a price. Ethan searched for an answer that wasn't simply, "because I can." Money could not be a reason. Money had sat helpless on the night he lost Elena. "Because no one helped me when I needed it most," he said. "And because you looked at those boys like the world could end, and you'd still hold them steady. I know what that kind of love is." She studied him, rain beating along her lashes. "They're not my blood. Blood is a beginning," he murmured. "Love is the choice you make after." In the garage, the storm's roar was muted, thunder pulsing like a heartbeat above concrete. He opened the rear door, and Amara slid in, tucking the twins close. Malik stirred, a tiny fist pressing against her collarbone. Micah sighed and went boneless with trust. Ethan handed over a soft throw from the trunk and watched her wrap each boy with ritual tenderness, as if warmth were a spell she could cast. He should have driven then. He should have taken them home, called someone, done the sensible thing. Instead, the hush of the garage made space for a dangerous clarity. The shape of a life he had wanted and lost, family at his shoulder, small voices, a future with faces and names. The pain that had taken up residence behind his ribs shifted, not easing exactly, but allowing light to pass through. "Amara," he said, and her name in his mouth felt like the first step onto dry land after months at sea. She looked up. "Yes? Do you believe in signs?" "I used to," she smiled without humor. "Then bills were due." He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if it didn't catch. "I thought my life ended on a clear day. No thunder, no warning. And then tonight, in the worst of it, I find you. You singing, trying to keep them calm. That lullaby." He swallowed, words wading through grief. "My wife sang that song. She said babies understand it in any language." Amara's gaze softened, the kind of softness that contains steel. People carry the same melodies through different storms. He closed the door gently so the twins would keep sleeping and stepped around to the passenger side. He didn't get in. He stood there, rain dripping from the garage lip, heart pounding in a rhythm he recognized from another life, the one where sudden certainty had driven him to buy plane tickets, to sign leases, to kneel with a ring and a vow. Madness, the world would call it. He called it clarity moving faster than fear. "What if we don't have to guess at meaning?" he asked. "What if meaning just arrived?" She frowned a little, wary. "What are you saying?" "Marry me." The two words hung in the damp air between them, impossible and bright. Somewhere overhead a car door slammed, footsteps echoed, a siren wailed far beyond the concrete. Amara blinked as if she'd misheard, then shook her head, a small, stunned motion. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said, voice low and steady. "I know you chose two children the world didn't. I know you will fold catastrophe smaller and smaller until it fits in your arms. I know you'd rather be soaked to the bone than let them go hungry. And I know that since the day I watched a paramedic cover my wife with a white sheet, I have not wanted anything. Until right now." That's grief talking, she whispered, but it was not dismissal. It was a plea for him to protect himself. It's grief opening a door, he answered. I can feed you tonight. I can book a hotel. I can wire money to buy time. Or I can tell you the truth. I want to give these boys my name and my protection. I want to build something that cannot be blown apart by one bad day. I want to wake up with purpose again. Amara stepped out of the car, the throw blankets still cocooning the twins, steam rising in soft threads from her wet clothes. The garage light painted a halo along the curve of her cheek. She stood close enough that he could see the questions marching behind her eyes, each with its own history. Men who promised and vanished. Doors closed gently and doors slammed hard. The long arithmetic of not enough. Marriage isn't a shelter you open in a storm, she said at last. Maybe it's the house you build because you remember the storm, he replied. Maybe some people are foundations. He reached into his pocket and found the ring he wore on a chain. A band of plain platinum, Elena's last gift to him, removed but never discarded. He didn't offer it like a substitute. He offered it like a bridge. I can't replace anyone, Amara said. I won't haunt your rooms as a stand-in for a ghost. You won't, he said, the certainty shocking him with its warmth. You will be the only thing in the room that is fully alive. Lightning rattled the sky. One of the twins whimpered. Amara rocked them with emotion so practiced it seemed older than language. She took a long breath, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. A thread of steel braided through the tremor. If I say yes, it's not because I need rescuing. It's because I'm choosing a life where these boys are safe, where love isn't a debt I can't pay back. If you say yes, Ethan answered, it will be because we are choosing each other, not out of pity, out of courage. She studied him as if reading fine print only she could see. And if I say no, I'll drive you to a warm place and stock your fridge and put cash in your hand, he said softly. And I'll still check every door, every night, for the rest of my life, wondering if I left the future outside. The smallest smile touched her mouth, surprise at his honesty maybe, or at the way his voice shook on the last word. She looked down at the boys, then back up at the man in the rain, holding out a past and a future tied in a circle of silver. Okay, she whispered. Okay? He barely breathed it. She nodded once, and the nod carried more authority than a shouted yes. But we do this with our eyes open. Papers, protections, counseling. We grieve what was. We don't lie to each other about what hurts. We build a house that the weather can't take, he said, relief and awe mingling. Something heavy lifting from his chest like a bird convinced to fly again. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was loose, almost comically so, but it found its place as if it had been waiting there in another story. A laugh broke out of her, astonished and bright, and in the same instant Malik let out a sleepy sigh that sounded impossibly like consent. For a heartbeat, the city held still. Traffic hushed. The thunder receded. The rain at the edge of the garage shimmered like beaded curtains parting for a stage entrance. They stood facing each other, man inked with loss, woman soldered by resilience, neither rescued, both revealed. And as he reached to gather her and the twins into the dry, into the waiting car, a new sentence wrote itself behind Ethan's ribs, simple and undeniable. This is how a life begins. Not with certainty, but with courage enough to step from flood into future, together. By the time Ethan eased the car beneath the portico, the storm had thinned to a silver mist that clung to the tower like breath on glass. The penthouse elevator rose without a sound, carrying 4 lives upward, 2 asleep against their mother's chest, 1 man stripped of certainties, 1 woman learning the weight of being chosen. When the doors opened, Atlanta unscrolled around them in panes of night, highways braided with light, stadiums pulsing like distant hearts, rain still stippling the city into a million small miracles. Amara didn't step forward at first. She stood on the threshold, taking in everything at once. The hush of expensive air, the pale oak floors, the sweep of windows, the piano near the corner where the skyline fell away. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something floral that had no name, only memory. On a console, a black and white photograph, a woman laughing with her head thrown back, belly rounded beneath a summer dress. Elena. The house spoke softly but clearly. A life paused mid-breath. "Come in," Ethan said, voice low. "It's warm." She crossed the line. The twins tightened in their sleep, then settled as if the room itself were a blanket. He set his keys down and nearly reached for the photograph out of habit, then didn't. Choices, he reminded himself. Tonight must be made of choices. "I called ahead," he said, almost apologetic. "Rosa stocked a few things. I didn't know sizes, so we guessed." "Rosa?" Amara asked. "House manager, family to me." A knock, as if summoned by her name. A woman in her 50s stepped in, damp hair caught in a clip, eyes bright with a mother's frank assessment. "Signor Ethan," she said, then clocked the sleeping bundles in Amara's arms and softened. "Dios mío, princes!" She looked to Amara, not to him. "You must be freezing. I'm Rosa Delgado. Your towels are warm. Formula is on the counter. If I did wrong brand, we fix. We always fix." The words were a hand held out across a river. Amara took it. "Thank you." Rosa moved like someone who understood emergencies. Quietly, efficiently, without commentary, setting bottles to sterilize, laying out tiny clothes, drawing the softest throw across the back of a couch. When she vanished down the hall, the apartment felt less like a museum and more like a room unbuttoned at the throat. Ethan led Amara to the guest suite. No, not guest. He heard the word and corrected himself. "This is yours," he said. "Yours and the boys. No expectations. No clock running. We'll meet an attorney this week for guardianship paperwork. We'll find a counselor. My friend Lila is excellent. And we'll do this with our eyes open." He paused, searching her face. "If any of this feels wrong, you tell me and we start again." She nodded, relief and wariness braided together. "I don't break easy," she said quietly, "but I bruise like anybody." While she changed the twins, he stood in the doorway, learning the choreography of small care. How to angle his body so her hands were free. How to hand her wipes without making it a ceremony. How to look away when she needed privacy and look back when she needed witness. Malik dreamed with his mouth open. Micah clung with starfish fingers to the collar of her shirt. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen, as if grief had been a clenched fist and was now remembering how to be a hand. They fed the boys on the sofa with the city for a nightlight. Amara's lullaby rose and fell, soft, steady, the rhythm of a heart remembering its work. Ethan found himself humming the second line before he knew it. She glanced up, surprised then not. Some songs make their own bridges. "Do you want me to?" he began, reaching for a burp cloth. "I've got it," she said, then tilted Malik to his shoulder and nodded at the cloth. "But yes, please." He held the tiny square of cotton as if it were a treaty. When Malik's small back thumped against his palm and a hiccup announced success, Ethan laughed. Brief, startled, as if he'd stumbled onto a spring in a desert. Amara was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not suspicion, not gratitude. Something like recognition. By 2 a.m, the twins slept in the crib Rosa had set up, as if miracles were counted in Allen wrenches and patience. Amara stood in the doorway watching them breathe. "They've never slept this quiet," she whispered. "The storm usually gets inside their dream." "Then maybe tonight the house stands between them and the weather," he said. The hallway to the kitchen passed the console table. He didn't mean to stop, but he did. Elena's laughter was caught forever in silver halide, summer crystallized. Amara halted beside him. The silence between them lengthened, not uncomfortable but honest. "You loved her," Amara said, not a question. "I love her," he corrected softly, in a way that doesn't argue with the present. Her gaze flicked to the piano, to the framed ultrasound prop near the metronome. Do you want me to? I can sleep somewhere else. I don't want to be a shape cut to fit where someone used to be. Ethan exhaled. The truth was a thin wire he needed to walk without looking down. I don't want you to be anyone's afterimage, he said. In the morning, we'll move what hurts into a room where it can be tended, not erased, honored. And then we'll make space for what's next. The morning didn't break so much as lift. Clouds bruised purple sliding aside, light pooling along the floorboards. Ethan tried to make breakfast and learned that grief had not taught him how to coax eggs into cooperation. The pan hissed, the toast carbonized, the fire alarm offered its opinion. Amara laughed, unrestrained, sudden, the laughter of someone who hadn't had cause for it in too long. Malik clapped solemnly. Micah tried to imitate the alarm and failed adorably. Rosa rescued the kitchen with the gentle tyranny of experience and set plates on the island as if delivering a verdict. No one starved on her watch. At 9, the doorbell chimed, and Dr. Lila Morgan arrived with rain on her coat and candor in her eyes. She hugged Ethan without pity and greeted Amara without curiosity, as if this were not headline material, but simply Tuesday. In the living room, she spoke of grief like weather, unavoidable, survivable, different on each skin. We don't rush the sky, she said, but we do install better roofs. She recommended individual sessions, then family work when the ground felt steady. Amara listened with her arms folded and her chin lifted, the posture of a woman who had already outlived multiple forecasts. After Lila left, Amara wandered to the piano. She didn't touch the keys. She touched the dust cover with the back of her fingers, the way you test water you're not yet ready to enter. I used to play hymns for my grandmother, she said. 2 fingers, mostly, badly. Elena played Debussy, Ethan replied, then winced at the comparison his sentence risked, at the ghosts conversation can invite. We can close this for a while. Or open it, Amara said, surprising them both. She lifted the fallboard. The keys lay bone-white and perfectly aligned, a smile the house hadn't used in months. She set one finger down and found the first note of the lullaby, shy and true. Ethan, without meaning to, found the harmony. The sound that rose was simple and untrained, and better than either alone. They worked the rest of the day at little things that mattered more than they looked, organizing the boys' clothes into drawers that whispered permanence, moving the ultrasound and a handful of photographs into a sunlit study where memory could be intentional, changing the scent of the living room from unnamed floral to the warm, ordinary holiness of cornbread and coffee. Between tasks, there were small negotiations, how the bills would sit, what names would be on what papers, what pace a heart could keep without tearing. On the balcony that evening, the city exhaled steam and light. Traffic hummed like a lullaby the ground sings to itself. Malik slept. Micah gnawed the ear of a stuffed rabbit with philosophical determination. Amara leaned into the rail and closed her eyes. I've been poor all my life, she said, but this is the first time I felt rich. In what way? He asked. In margin, she answered. Space between crisis and collapse. Enough room to make a better choice. He wanted to tell her he felt poor in precisely the place she felt rich, and that somehow standing there, the ledger balanced. Instead, he said, then the house is working. She turned, and in the amber wash of the city, he saw it, the shadow of fear retreating, the light of a new kind of courage arriving. Shelter had been the first promise. What came next would be more difficult, letting the house learn their names, and letting their names learn each other without erasing what came before. Night gathered. Somewhere below, sirens braided and unbraided. Above, the last scraps of storm drifted apart like curtains easing from their rods. Inside, the piano waited, the crib breathed. The photograph in the study warmed in a square of late sun. The weather would return, storms always do, but the foundations had shifted. And in the soft, ordinary miracle of a safe room and a shared song, The future clicked one notch closer, like a door that has decided to close gently instead of slam. Morning arrived like a truce. The rain had washed Atlanta clean. Highways gleamed like ribbons pulled taut, and somewhere a church bell threaded the air with a patient kind of hope. In the penthouse, the day began with the small music of survival, bottles clinking, water running, Rosa humming a tune that sounded like the shape of a blessing. Amara stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, the twins drowsy in their high chairs, while Ethan read labels as if deciphering sacred texts. Iron fortified, stage 2, BPA free. It was the first breakfast whose success depended on more than his credit card, and it steadied him. Too thick? He asked. Add milk until it folds back into itself, Amara said, demonstrating with a wooden spoon. Her voice carried no apology, only knowledge. She had learned to measure by eye and hunger. He followed, and when Malik accepted the spoon without a protest, and Micah tapped the tray in approval, Ethan's chest loosened. The victories were small and unglamorous, but they were the kind that built a life. After breakfast, the city called. Ethan needed to review a partnership proposal at Cole AI. A video call would suffice, but Lila had warned him about sealing himself inside digital rooms. Step into your own life, she'd said. Let the world see you with something to lose. He surprised himself when he asked, "Come with me?" And more when Amara answered, "If there's a room I can use to feed the boys." Rosa packed a bag with practice speed, diapers, wipes, extra onesies, and the talismanic rabbit Micah refused to release. The office lobby's marble and chrome could have made Amara shrink, but instead she moved through it with the surety of someone who had crossed harder thresholds. Receptionists watched her with curiosity that softened when the twins grinned. Security waved Ethan through, and without prompting, helped carry the stroller up the last step. Kindness multiplies in the open. In a glass-walled conference room, Ethan presented slides about fairness metrics and bias audits, while just beyond the door, Amara rocked Malik and explained to a young intern how to swaddle a niece who wouldn't sleep. The contrast felt less like dissonance and more like harmony, the work of building things that held. Between meetings, Ethan found them in a quiet lounge. Amara was on the floor, shoes off, showing Micah the miracle of a mirror. The baby pressed his palm to the glass. His reflection pressed back. He laughed, the kind of laugh that makes adults exchange glances over the child's head and think of words like gift. Amara looked up at Ethan with that unnameable recognition again, as if she'd opened a door to a room where his name had been waiting on a shelf. "You could do this from home," she said, tilting her chin toward the conference rooms. "And yet you walked us into your world." "I think my world is supposed to look like this," he said, meaning the babies, the laptop, the half-drunk coffee cooling on the windowsill, the lunch Rosa had labeled coal, not spicy. Elena had once told him that people imagine their futures like cathedrals, all arches and stained glass. But the truth, she'd said, is that most of what holds a cathedral together is invisible, load-bearing stone. Today felt like stone. In the afternoon, a small crisis made its entrance with the speed of a match to tinder. Malik's forehead ran hot beneath Amara's palm. Micah refused his bottle. Panic flashed in Ethan, the old, helpless kind that had followed the crash like a shadow, but Amara's voice cut through, calm and authoritative. It could be nothing, or teeth, or both. They left immediately, traffic lurching around them, as if the city understood the soft emergency in the back seat. At home, Rosa became triage nurse. Acetaminophen was measured, cool cloths were applied, the pediatrician's line called. Within an hour, the fever receded from crisis to watchfulness. Malik slept, sweat curling his hair at the nape. Micah surrendered to the rabbit's ear and the steady drum of his mother's heart. Ethan stood in the doorway and let himself feel the wave pass through. "I didn't know it could change that fast," he admitted. "It always can," Amara said. "It's terror and mercy, back to back." He nodded, memorizing the cadence of her steadiness. Later, when the twins slept, he opened the study where they had placed Elena's photographs. The room had changed without erasing its truth. Sun pooled at the baseboards. A small vase held eucalyptus that smelled like clean rain. Amara stepped in quietly and stood beside him. Together they regarded the life that had been. He thought of Lila's phrase, grief like weather, and understood for the first time that some storms become climate. You learn to plant different trees. Tell me something true about her, Amara said. She was stubborn about joy, he answered. She would stop a car to show me a sky I was ignoring. She didn't like lilies. She said they smelled like funerals. And she could always find the second harmony to a song. He paused. Tell me something true about you. I was most myself in hospital hallways, she said, before everything went sideways. I liked the night shift because the world was quiet and you could hear who was afraid. I used to think my life would be small but steady. Kitchen table, church potlucks, neighbors who knew where my spare key was. She laughed once, soft. Now I live in the sky. He could have told her she brought a kitchen table into the sky just by standing there. He settled instead on, steady is a kind of miracle too. That evening, the piano was not an altar to what was gone, but a table set for what remained. Amara sat and found the hymn she'd mentioned, fingers clumsy, courage sure. Ethan listened, then picked out the counter melody Elena had loved. For a moment he felt the old guilt rise, like dancing in borrowed shoes, but Amara's foot nudged his. Play, she said. The past is not a jealous God. They did, and the sound was imperfect, and therefore human, and therefore, somehow, perfect. Days began to string together like beads, childcare and board meetings, laundry and legal drafts for guardianship, sessions with Lila where Amara learned it wasn't disloyal to be happy, and Ethan learned that love could multiply without dividing. Small rituals rooted, a walk at dusk around the rooftop garden, Rose's stories about her sons, a game where Micah hid the rabbit and Ethan pretended genuine distress until the baby, delighted, returned it like a magician revealing his favorite trick. On Friday, the four of them went to the West End Farmers Market because Amara missed the hum of ordinary crowds. Vendors called out greetings. A saxophone turned the air to velvet. An older woman with salt-silver hair paused to admire the twins. You're doing a fine job, she told Amara, then to Ethan with a wink. And you look like a man who finally put his hands to use. On the way back, thunder grumbled low. Not a threat, only a reminder. Amara glanced up and smiled. Looks like the sky is practicing. For what? He asked. For letting go, she said. That night, as the first polite drops tapped the windows, Malik reached toward Ethan from his crib, half asleep and certain. Ethan lifted him, felt the small weight settle against his shoulder, and something inside him answered with a yes that did not need words. In the dim, Amara watched from the doorway, her silhouette a question and an answer both. He realized he had stopped counting days since the crash. The number no longer governed him. Time had softened under the pressure of the present. He was not healed. He was healing, active tense, continuous. When they finally sat together on the balcony, the city breathed in the rain, lights blurred to softness, sirens far and harmless. Amara tucked her feet under her and leaned her head against his shoulder. It was not a declaration, not yet. It was a resting place. Do you ever think, she said, that we were carried to the same shore by different storms? All the time, he answered. And now? Now, he said, letting the word expand until it held them both. We learn the weather together. The rain found its rhythm. Inside, two boys dreamed in a room that remembered thunder and did not fear it. In the study, a photo caught the last pale glow and did not dim. On the piano, the hymn they'd played still shimmered in the lid, as if sound could stain wood. And on the balcony, with the sky practicing forgiveness, two people who had declined to die of their losses learned, breath by breath, note by note, how to live. Night had a sound in the penthouse, a hush filled with almost memories. Sometimes it was only the wind folding itself around the glass. But tonight it was footsteps that weren't there, a piano key breathing on its own. Ethan woke from half-sleep, heart pacing, and for a moment he couldn't remember whether the face beside him belonged to the past or the present. Amara stirred on the couch, a book sliding from her lap. The twins' quiet breathing came through the baby monitor like a tide returning. "Bad dream?" she asked. "Not new," he said. "Just one that's learned my address." She smiled without light. "Ghosts get comfortable when you feed them silence." The words stayed with him the next morning as they dressed the twins. He'd avoided telling her everything. Grief has corners you don't invite company into. But Amara's eyes had a way of asking questions without words, and the house itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. So he began. They sat at the breakfast bar where the marble still held warmth from Rosa's coffee pot. "Elena and I met in grad school," he said. "She studied architecture. She loved things that lasted, bridges, cathedrals, the kind of math that makes beauty hold weight." His fingers traced invisible blueprints on the counter. "We spent years building a future measured in foundations and due dates. Then one Tuesday, a delivery truck ran a red light. I was 2 cars behind. I saw the airbag deploy. I saw her stop moving." Amara didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch until it became bearable. "I tried to rebuild," he continued. "Work became religion. The company doubled, then tripled. Investors called me visionary." He laughed once. "They didn't see I was just trying to outrun her absence." He expected pity. What he found was recognition. "Grief can look like ambition," she said. "I used to call mine responsibility." "Tell me." Amara poured juice into the twins' cups, her movements steady, ritualistic. "My mother worked 2 jobs. When she got sick, I promised I'd finish nursing school before she was gone. I did, barely. I wanted to heal people who didn't have insurance, people like us." She paused. "Then I met Darius." The name entered the room like a draft. "He was a paramedic, brave, funny, tired. We built a life around our shifts. When my mother died, he held me through the night. For a while, I thought that was love." Ethan waited. "Until the twins," she said softly. "I was working long hours. He started disappearing into extra shifts that didn't exist. Then came the tests, the kind that measure DNA, not devotion. He found out they weren't his." Her jaw tightened. "I'd been an egg donor in college. It was supposed to help pay tuition. Years later, one of the embryos had been used, anonymously, legally. A technical error, they said. The twins were mine by birth, but not by blood. He called them proof of betrayal." She looked down at her hands. "He left before the paperwork could explain what my heart already knew. You don't have to share blood to share love." Ethan reached across the counter, not to rescue, but to witness. The weight between them changed shape. It wasn't pity, it was parity. That evening, the house seemed to breathe differently. The hallway lights dimmed to amber, and the photographs on the wall, Elena's smile, the ultrasound, no longer accused, only remembered. Amara paused at the threshold. "These are your ghosts," she said. "Mine don't have pictures, just sounds. The click of hospital shoes, the beep of monitors." "Do they still follow you?" "Only when it's quiet enough." She tilted her head. "Same for you?" He nodded. "I think they want to be acknowledged, not exercised." Together they walked the corridor, stopping before each framed moment. Ethan told her the story behind them, the road trip to Asheville, the anniversary dinner when the waiter dropped the cake, the way Elena used to draw skylines on napkins. Amara listened, touching the frames as if reading Braille. When they reached the last photo, she asked, "Do you want to move them?" "No," he said. "I want to add to them." So she fetched her phone, imprinted a picture. The twins asleep side by side, Malik's hand on Micah's cheek, the rabbit tucked between. She slipped it into an empty frame and set it at the end of the row. "Ghosts and living, side by side. Later that night, thunder rolled distant again. They sat by the window, city lights reflected in the glass, like constellations rearranged for their sake. "She would have liked you," Ethan said. "You don't flinch at broken things." Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know they still hold water." The twins murmured in their sleep. Rosa's laughter drifted from the kitchen phone call. The piano waited, lid half open, not a shrine now, but a promise. Ethan leaned back and felt the first quiet day settle inside him. The first one not ruled by anniversaries or apologies. Outside, the storm passed without entering. Inside, two people sat in a house that had learned to contain both memory and possibility. The ghosts remained, gentle as rain on the glass, no longer asking to leave, only to be part of the story as it continued forward. The first morning of spring arrived wearing winter's breath. The city outside was pale and new, still trembling from the rain that had washed the night away. Inside the penthouse, light pooled gently on the piano lid where a cup of coffee left a perfect circle, the quiet evidence of living, not perfection. Ethan watched Amara in the kitchen, her back turned, hair coiled loosely at her neck. She was singing softly, not the lullaby this time, but something older, unguarded. The twins toddled at her feet, trading blocks in a negotiation only siblings understand. It was an ordinary scene, but to Ethan, it felt sacred. Months ago, his home had been a museum of absence. Now it breathed. It had a heartbeat again. He remembered that first storm, her face beneath the flickering streetlight, her trembling voice asking only for milk. What began as a rescue had become something else entirely, a resurrection. Somewhere between late-night feedings and quiet piano duets, between laughter that startled him and silences that steadied him, Ethan realized the truth. He no longer lived with grief. He lived with her. But love, he learned, required courage the way lungs require air. That evening, the air turned gold. Rosa took the twins to the park, leaving the apartment strangely still. Amara stood by the balcony, watching the sky fade into bruised lavender. "It's funny," she said, her voice reflective. "Storms used to scare me. Now they remind me I survived them." Ethan joined her, handing her a blanket. "You didn't just survive," he said. "You carried others through." She smiled. "You make it sound noble. It was just survival." "No," he said quietly. "It was grace." She turned to face him, eyes searching. "You talk like you've rehearsed something." He laughed under his breath, nerves catching. "Maybe I have." Amara's gaze softened, but she didn't look away. The wind tangled a strand of hair across her cheek. He reached to tuck it behind her ear, fingers grazing her skin. And for a heartbeat, the whole world tilted toward that single point of contact. "When I first met you," he began, "I asked you something impossible. In the middle of a storm, with the whole city watching, I asked you to marry me. It was reckless, maybe even selfish. I was drowning, and you were the first hand I saw reaching through the rain." Her breath hitched, the memory flashing behind her eyes. "And I said yes," she whispered, "because I didn't know what else to do." "Yes," he said, voice trembling. "We began in desperation. But what's between us now? It's not a rescue. It's not guilt. It's love, Amara. And it's patient this time." He reached into his pocket, but not for the old ring. That one, Elena's, rested in a glass box in the study, safe and honored. Instead, he drew out a small velvet case. The ring inside was simple, crafted from rose gold, etched with faint waves that caught the light. Two currents meeting and never parting again. He didn't kneel this time. He stood before her, steady. "The first time I asked you to marry me, it was in the rain. A moment of madness, like shouting at the heavens and hearing an echo. This time, I'm asking in the light, with both our ghosts watching, with full hearts and open eyes. Marry me, Amara. Not to fix what's broken, but to build what's new." The world seemed to hold its breath. Tears welled, slow and shimmering. She laughed through them, the sound bright and trembling. You always know how to make everything sound like a vow, she said. It is one, he replied. Every word since the night I found you has been a vow. Amara, yes, she said simply, but this time it's my turn to choose it. Ethan exhaled, a sound half laughter, half prayer. He slid the ring onto her finger, where it caught the last sunlight of the day. The city outside came alive, lights flickering one by one, as if the skyline itself was applauding. He pulled her into his arms. It wasn't the desperate embrace of two lost people clinging to warmth. It was the quiet certainty of two souls who had found home. They stayed like that, breathing in sync, until Rosa's voice echoed down the hall, the twins giggling, tiny shoes squeaking against the floor. Malik barreled in first, holding a dandelion puff from the park, its white seeds trembling like a halo in his small fist. He reached up toward Amara. For you, Mama. Ethan crouched beside them. Make a wish, he whispered. Amara closed her eyes. I already got mine. The seeds scattered, caught by a breeze that slipped through the open balcony door. For a heartbeat, they danced. Thousands of tiny white lights swirling in the golden air, drifting over the piano, the photos, the crib, the new ring glinting on her hand. When they landed, the apartment glowed as if touched by blessing. Later, after the boys were asleep, Ethan and Amara sat at the piano. She pressed a key, the same note she'd played that first night, and he followed, building the harmony around it. Their melody had changed. It wasn't mournful anymore. It rose and fell like breathing, fragile, imperfect, but alive. She looked at him over the keys. You ever think about the first rain? Every day, he said. It's how I remember that miracles rarely look like miracles when they begin. Outside, thunder murmured on the horizon, distant, familiar, no longer feared. The sky was rehearsing again, but this time for celebration. Amara leaned her head against his shoulder. So, what happens next? Ethan smiled. Now, he said, his fingers brushing the ring on her hand, we build the house that can stand any weather. And as the night drew its quiet curtain, two people who had once met in ruin began again, not as savior and saved, not as halves of a tragedy, but as builders of something neither storm nor sorrow could undo. The ghosts in the hallway grew still. The city exhaled, and love, reborn, learned to stand without trembling. The morning of their wedding unfolded like a whispered prayer. The city had decided to gift them a perfect day. Atlanta brushed in gold, clouds trailing soft shadows across buildings that gleamed like hope itself. The rain that had once brought them together had given way to sunlight so tender it felt like forgiveness. Amara stood by the tall window of the small chapel Ethan had restored for the ceremony. It had been abandoned for years, ivy claiming the walls, dust nesting in its pews. Ethan had seen it while jogging one morning and knew immediately, this is where redemption belongs. Together they'd spent months bringing it back to life. Now light filtered through stained glass, painting the floor with colors of resurrection. She wore a simple ivory gown, no jewels, no extravagance. The fabric clung gently to her frame, whispering as she moved. Her hair was coiled in soft twists, crowned by a single white camellia, the flower of faithfulness. In her hands she held a bouquet of magnolias and lavender, their fragrance wrapping around her like a promise. Rosa adjusted her veil with trembling hands. Mija, she said softly, her accent thick with pride. You look like every prayer I ever said for a good man to see a good woman. Amara smiled, her eyes shining. He didn't just see me, Rosa. He saw through me. At the same time, in a room just across the hall, Ethan stared at his reflection in the mirror. The tuxedo felt too formal for a man who once believed he'd buried his heart with his past. Lila, standing behind him, smiled knowingly. You look terrified, she teased. I am, he admitted. Not of marrying her, of deserving her. Lila fixed his boutonniere, an ivory camellia to match Amara's. Then you're ready, she said. The chapel doors opened to the slow, trembling chords of the piano, Amara's melody, the one that had carried them through storms. The guests, just a handful of loved ones, Rosa, Lila, a few of Ethan's lifelong friends, and the quiet presence of those who had stood by them, turned as Amara stepped inside. Ethan forgot how to breathe. She walked toward him through the aisle of color and light, the stained glass scattering rainbows over her skin. Her gaze never wavered. Every step she took was a declaration. She was not a woman rescued from rain, but one walking willingly into her chosen sun. When she reached him, Ethan took her hands, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist, feeling her pulse steady and sure. The officiant's voice was gentle, but Ethan barely heard the words. Every sound blurred except the quiet rhythm between their joined hands. "I never thought I'd stand here again," Ethan began when it was time for his vows. "I thought love had one life, and I'd spent mine already. But then you came, in the storm, and reminded me that grief doesn't bury love. It plants it deeper. You showed me that second chances don't erase the past, they redeem it. You didn't heal me by fixing what was broken. You healed me by letting me be human again." His voice trembled as he took the ring, a thin band of rose gold engraved with the words, "Love builds again." "Amara Jameson," he said, "I vowed to stand in the rain with you and in the sun beside you, to honor your strength, to protect your peace, and to never mistake your kindness for weakness. You and the boys are not the life I rebuilt. You are the life that rebuilt me." Tears blurred Amara's vision as she took a deep breath. "When I met you," she said, "I had nothing left to give but hope, and even that was borrowed. You gave it back to me in ways I didn't think possible. You saw beauty where I saw ruin. You loved my children as your own before I could even trust love again. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person who stays." She slipped the matching ring onto his finger. "Ethan Cole, I promise to never let the silence between us grow heavy again, to speak when I'm scared, to laugh when I'm weary, and to hold your hand in every storm, because you showed me that the rain was never meant to drown us. It was meant to baptize us into something new." A hush fell over the room. For a long, fragile moment, it seemed as though the air itself leaned closer to listen. Then the officiant smiled. "By the vows spoken here today, and by the love that already made them true long before this hour, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Ethan cupped Amara's face, his touch reverent. "You've always been my wife," he whispered before their lips met. The kiss was not the wild, desperate kind of the rainstorm. It was slower, deliberate, a sealing of something sacred. The guests rose, applause rippling through the chapel like wind through trees. Outside, bells began to ring, echoing across the quiet neighborhood. The twins, dressed in matching linen suits, ran down the aisle shouting, "Mama! Papa!" Micah tripped over his shoelaces. Malik helped him up, and both launched themselves into their parents' arms. Laughter broke the solemnity, and the sound filled every corner of the chapel, like sunlight finally reaching shadow. After the ceremony, they walked into the courtyard where the garden had been replanted by volunteers from Amara's clinic. Roses climbed the walls, jasmine threaded through the air. Ethan lifted Amara's hand and kissed her ring, the metal catching the glow of dusk. "10 months ago," he murmured, "I asked you to marry me because I didn't want to die alone. Today I ask because I don't ever want to live without you." She smiled, tears threatening again. "So, what are we now?" He thought for a moment. "Builders," he said. "We build life. We build family. We build hope." Rosa called out for a photo. The twins pressed between them, giggling, their small hands clutching their parents' rings. The photographer captured the frame just as the wind picked up, petals swirling around them like confetti from heaven. Later, when the guests had gone and the night had softened, Amara and Ethan stood in the doorway of their new home. A modest house in Grant Park, all wood and windows and promise. The walls smelled of paint and possibility. Ethan turned the key, then lifted her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole." Amara laughed against his shoulder. "We've been home for a while," she said. He set her down and looked around. The light spilling over toys, the piano waiting in the corner, the photo of their wedding already framed on the mantel. Outside, fireflies began their evening dance. Inside, the twins stirred in their beds, sighing contentedly in sleep. And for the first time in years, both Ethan and Amara felt it fully, the stillness that only arrives when every piece of the heart finally finds where it belongs. The rain had given them each other. The sun had given them peace. And the promise they made beneath the glass and gold of that chapel would carry them through every season yet to come. The days that followed the wedding slipped into a rhythm so gentle it almost felt unreal, like the calm heartbeat of a song between verses. For the first time in years, Ethan woke not to silence, but to the laughter of two small voices, to the smell of coffee and lavender soap, to the low hum of Amara's humming as she moved through their new home. The house had learned their names. It echoed them softly when they weren't there. Every morning began with sunlight spilling through the tall windows of the Grant Park home, falling over a breakfast table scattered with toast crumbs, sippy cups, and blueprints for the future. Amara's foundation, the Grace Initiative, was beginning to take shape. She spent her afternoons drafting proposals for programs that would help single mothers find work and shelter. Ethan, proud and careful, guided her through business plans but never took over. "You built this dream," he told her. "I'm just the scaffolding." He had become softer since the wedding. The sharp edges that once defined him, the precision, the control, had dulled into something steadier. He traded late-night board meetings for bedtime stories, quarterly forecasts for the measured rhythm of lullabies. On weekends, he took Malik and Micah to the park, where he learned the particular humility of toddlers, how easily joy could be found in something as small as a pebble that looked like a heart. Sometimes, after the boys were asleep, Amara found him sitting by their cribs, a quiet smile ghosting across his face. "They dream loud," he'd whisper. "I can hear them inventing worlds." She would lean on the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with a soft ache of gratitude. "You're a good father," she'd say. "I'm still learning," he'd answer. "Then you're already doing it right." By spring, the garden behind their home had become a living metaphor for their life together. Roses climbed the lattice. The magnolias Amara planted bloomed early, defiantly. She spent her mornings tending to them while Ethan worked on the terrace, his laptop open beside a mug gone cold. They lived in companionable silence, the kind born not of distance but of trust. There were small imperfections too, tiny fissures in their perfect surface that made everything feel human. Ethan, meticulous to a fault, still lined up the silverware like soldiers, while Amara preferred the chaos of lived-in comfort. Once, she caught him reorganizing the spice rack alphabetically and simply shook her head. "You're fighting a war you can't win," she teased. "I like order," he replied, lips twitching. "And I like cinnamon where it doesn't belong," she countered, sliding her arms around him from behind. "Compromise, Mr. Cole." They learned to meet each other halfway in everything, between planning and spontaneity, between logic and faith, between his quiet morning and her stubborn hope. In May, Amara's foundation launched its first program, partnering with the city hospital to offer childcare support for working mothers. The opening event was small but radiant. Dozens of women filled the hall, each carrying their own story of endurance. When Amara spoke, her voice was calm but unflinchingly honest. "I know what it feels like," she said, looking into their faces, "to count coins for formula, to be told you don't belong in the life you dream of. But love, real love for your children, for yourself, isn't weakness, it's power." Ethan watched her from the back of the room, the twins perched on his lap. Pride welled in him, vast and wordless. He had built companies that changed the world, but none of them felt as alive as this moment. Amara standing before a crowd, reclaiming her story and giving others permission to do the same. That night, when they returned home, she found a note on her pillow in Ethan's handwriting. "You didn't just survive. You turned survival into art." Their happiness, however, was not quiet. It was luminous, almost too bright. The universe, in its strange symmetry, seems to balance joy with the promise of trial. And so, beneath the laughter and the soft routines, something darker began to stir. It started with small things. Ethan waking at night to the ghost sound of rain when the sky was clear. Amara catching him staring too long at Elena's photo, not with longing, but with confusion, as though he couldn't decide whether memory was friend or thief. She didn't ask, and he didn't confess that sometimes, when the boys called him Daddy, he still heard a phantom whisper of another name, Elena, carried by wind. And then there were the letters. One afternoon, Rosa brought in a stack of mail. Between bills and invitations was an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, folded twice, of Amara and the twins, taken at the park weeks before. On the back, a single line written in sharp ink. He deserves to know the truth. Amara's hands shook. The photo fell to the counter. When Ethan came home, she had already hidden it in a drawer, telling herself she'd explain later, when she understood what it meant. But secrets, even small ones, have their own gravity. The next evening, she caught her reflection in the window, her face calm, the house behind her full of warmth. And for the first time in months, fear rippled through her peace. She had known storms before. She could feel one coming now. That night, thunder grumbled at the edge of the horizon, faint but certain. Ethan wrapped an arm around her in his sleep, the way he always did when it rained, unaware that the danger waiting for them this time wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from the past, the part of their story that neither of them had written yet, but which had been waiting, quietly, in the dark. And in that fragile space between peace and reckoning, the house exhaled softly, as if bracing itself. The quiet before the storm had arrived. The storm didn't announce itself with lightning. It knocked, politely, precisely, at 10:03 a.m., as if punctuality could disguise intent. Rosa wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced at Amara, who was sorting donation forms for the Grace Initiative at the kitchen island. The twins were building an empire of blocks on the rug, their kingdom a wobbling skyline of color. Sunlight pooled across the floor. The house exhaled a contented sigh. Then the doorbell chimed again. One measured note, another, like a metronome, counting down. "I've got it," Amara called, smoothing the edge of a stack of papers that suddenly felt too sharp. When she opened the door, the world tilted, subtly, like a glass set down just off center. The woman on the threshold wore winter, the way other people wore perfume, a cool that preceded her into the room. Silver hair arranged with architectural precision, pearls that belonged to a lineage rather than a neck. Eyes like Ethan's, only colder, as if someone had turned off the lamp behind them. "Mrs. Cole," Amara said, because she knew the face from photographs and the ache from Ethan's rare, clipped sentences about estrangement. "Miss Johnson," the woman replied, taking in the foyer, the framed family photos, the faint evidence of toddlers, crayon traces near a baseboard, a tiny sneaker abandoned like an exclamation. Her smile was thin. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." "My name is Amara," she said evenly. "Would you like to come in?" "I won't take long." In the kitchen, Rosa wiped the same non-existent spot on the counter twice, then took the twins by the hand. "Come help me feed the birds, Misa Mortis." She ushered them to the back garden, closing the door with maternal diplomacy. Amara and Margaret faced each other across the island like opponents across a chessboard. The bouquet of magnolias on the counter was suddenly too fragrant. "I expected to meet you at a gala," Margaret said, setting her handbag on the marble, ownership disguised as elegance. "Or perhaps at a board meeting. But kitchens do tell the truth." "Kitchens feed people," Amara answered. "Truth tastes better with food." A flicker, surprise, annoyance. Margaret opened her bag, removed an envelope, and placed it between them. The weight of the paper was obscene, the way a smile can be when it hides teeth. "2 million, she said, tax-free. You'll take the boys, and you'll leave my son's life. Immediately." The word landed, boys, and Amara felt the softest part of herself coil. She did not touch the envelope. The temptation wasn't money. It was the desire to tear it in half and feel the sound echo like thunder. "Your son is my husband," she said quietly, "and Malik and Micah are his sons." Legally, perhaps. Margaret's eyes swept the room with clinical detachment. "Let's not pretend documents can make blood." "Blood makes relatives," Amara said, pulse steadying. "Love makes family." Margaret tilted her head, as if examining a fracture for hairline weakness. "You're very practiced at sentiment. You do well at a donor luncheon. Tell me, did you plan this? The rain, the pity, the speed of it all?" "I planned to keep 2 children alive," Amara replied. "That night was the plan. And then you married a man you barely knew." "We knew enough." Margaret's smile sharpened. "He is grieving, Ms. Johnson. Vulnerable. You arrived like a bomb. How convenient that your story aligns so perfectly with his wounds." Amara felt the old, heavy shame reach for her, the kind men like Darius had taught her to pick up and carry. She didn't lift it this time. "He chose me with his eyes open," she said, and believed it as she spoke. "We chose each other." Margaret glanced at the photographs on the wall. The wedding picture already on the mantel, the twins' crooked crowns at a birthday party, Ethan on the floor assembling a dollhouse with a concentration he once reserved for term sheets. The corners of her mouth twitched downward, as if the images offended her sense of realism. "You'll take the check," she said, "and you'll save yourself what's coming." "What's coming?" "The public," Margaret said. "They adore a tragic widower. They will not adore the woman who, what is the phrase, replaced his dead wife. They will pull your history like thread. They will find your time as an aid, your scholarship records, your donation." She let the last word hover, poisonous and sweet. "Do you think they won't ask who those children belong to?" For a moment, the room went soundless. No birds, no street, only the small metallic click of a trap resetting. Amara's mind flashed to the anonymous photograph and the line scrawled on the back. "He deserves to know the truth." Fear rose like heat. "I have nothing to hide," she said, though her voice snagged. "Then you have nothing to fear," Margaret replied, pleasure almost invisible at the edge of the phrase. She slid the envelope closer. 2 million buys privacy. It buys dignity. Take it and let my son return to the life he built." "The life he's building is here," Amara said softly. "With us." "Us," Margaret repeated, as if testing a foreign word for flaws. "You've been very careful with that pronoun." Amara reached for the envelope, not to claim but to look. The check was real. The zeros were a horizon. She pictured formula aisles, electric bills, Ellis Street shelters with waiting lists longer than summer. How many roofs could this rent? How many nights could this soften? The arithmetic of mercy wavered. And then the door from the garden clicked. Children's feet pattered. Ethan's key turned in the front lock at the same moment. Early, unexpected. The house pulled its breath back in. He saw his mother first, flawless, still, out of place in the kitchen's warm mess. And then the check, the way Amara's hand hovered above it like a flame, deciding whether to leap. For one heartbeat, no one spoke. The old choreography presented itself. Ethan, the well-raised son, Margaret, the empire's matriarch, Amara, the interloper. All it would take was one obedient step. He didn't take it. "Mother," he said, and his voice was a door closing gently but firmly. "You weren't invited." Margaret's eyebrows lifted in polite disdain. "I didn't realize hospitality required an appointment now." "It does when the visit carries a bribe," he answered. His gaze moved to Amara, not to interrogate but to anchor. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Amara said, finding him, letting his presence reassemble her spine. She set the check down as if placing something flammable away from flame. Margaret's attention shifted, calculating. "Ethan, be reasonable. You have responsibilities, optics, a board that expects stability. You cannot afford to love my wife," he said, almost curious. To raise my sons? To be the man I promised to be? Promises made under duress, she said lightly. Under weather. Promises remade in daylight, he replied. The twins peered around Rosa's legs, sensing vibrations adults pretend not to emit. Micah whispered, Mama? Malik flicked his gaze between faces, filing the world into safe and not safe. Amara knelt and opened her arms. It's okay, she told them, and in that simple sentence drew a line the size of a life. Margaret's mouth thinned to a string. I won't watch you throw yourself away. You don't have to watch, Ethan said. The sentence was kind, and it was final. She lifted her bag, dignity rearranged around absence. You will regret this, she said, and for the first time a crack opened in her poise. When the past knocks, when the papers run their stories, when donors whisper, you will wish you'd listened. Ethan took Amara's hand. He didn't squeeze. He didn't need to. The past has already knocked, he said. We opened the door and set a table. Margaret held his gaze a fraction too long, as if the right combination of syllables might still turn the lock back. Then she pivoted, heels crisp on the tile, and left the envelope on the counter. A white rectangle like a snowdrift refusing to melt. Silence followed her out. Real silence. The kind that acknowledges the shape of the void. Rosa exhaled. The magnolias did not. Ethan reached for the check, tore it neatly into strips, and dropped the pieces into the sink. The garbage disposal growled, metal teeth turning paper to pulp. When the roar subsided, the kitchen's ordinary sounds returned. The clock, the birds, Malik's careful stacking of a blue block on a red one. Amara leaned against the island, the adrenaline leaving in a slow tide. She knows, she whispered, meaning more than money, more than class, meaning genes and secrets, and the anonymous photograph in her drawer. I know, Ethan said, and his eyes told her he knew she was not talking about his mother. About the boys, she said. About how they came to me, he nodded. I know that the moment they reached for me and said my name, they became mine. Everything else is paperwork or gossip. She wanted to believe that was enough to keep the storm at bay. She wanted peace to be stronger than rumor. But outside, the sky had gone a shade too still, like a room that's just been emptied. What if this doesn't end at our door? She asked. It won't, he said, honest as pain. He pulled her close, the twins pressing into their legs like small, anchored ships. But we will. He meant we will stand. He meant we will hold. Still, as the afternoon light faded, the air tightened, a pressure headache the house could feel. Somewhere, a camera shutter clicked in a car across the street. Somewhere, an email drafted itself. And in a drawer Amara hadn't opened since yesterday, a photograph waited with a sentence sharpened to a blade. He deserves to know the truth. The quiet day had ended. The weather had turned, and love, newly vowed, fiercely chosen, braced its shoulders for the wind. He arrived with the same swagger that had once passed for charm, hands in the pockets of a jacket that remembered better days, jaw set in the practiced angle of a man who survives by bluffing. Darius Holt stepped through the glass doors of the Grace Initiative as if he owned oxygen, and every molecule in the lobby turned to look. Amara had not seen him in nearly 2 years. Memory did its cruel arithmetic in a blink. Late-night shifts, half-warm coffee, a laugh that stitched up her rough edges, then the unraveling, the paperwork, the door that stayed closed when she knocked. He had been her almost, her nearly, her lesson. He smiled, and time remembered why it left. You look good, Mara, he said, as though the nickname still had keys to her house. She didn't move. You don't, she answered, and it startled a laugh out of the receptionist behind the desk. Darius's gaze slid over the lobby's bulletin board. Job postings, daycare signups, a flyer for a free CPR class, then returned to Amara with a calculation that felt like cold hands on a warm neck. Nice place. Fancy. Guess charity's a good business when you marry up. There it was, the striking smile, cruelty wrapped in compliment. Amara inhaled and found steel. We're a non-profit, she said. The only thing we collect here is hope. Cute. He leaned closer, voice dropping. And expensive, which is why you're going to help me, sweetheart. The old word hit like a shove. She didn't step back. Say what you came to say. He glanced around, theatrically concerned with privacy, then lifted a manila folder from inside his jacket and fanned out a few papers, the edges dog-eared, triumph souring the air. Copies of copies, he said. Emails from that clinic, the egg donation, the legal error, all very modern. He tilted his head. What happens when the public learns those twins are nobodies? Not yours, not your rich husband's, just paperwork with legs. The insult didn't land where he thought. Amara felt rage flare and then resolve. They are mine because I chose them, she said evenly. They are Ethan's because he chose them. Love is the only legal I need. Darius chuckled, unamused. The world loves a story until it doesn't. Imagine the headlines. Imagine donors. Imagine your perfect husband, the one who buys churches and calls it healing, waking up to a storm he can't code his way out of. She let him talk. Predators mistake listening for fear. What do you want? She asked. The smile sharpened. A stipend. Consider it retroactive appreciation. Let's say 20 grand a month. Small price to keep your fairy tale out of the meat grinder. Extortion wears many colognes. This one stank of last chances. Before Amara could answer, the elevator chimed and opened, and Ethan stepped out with Rosa at his side. One look was enough. The mood changed temperature. Ethan's calm was a blade when he needed it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Mr. Holt, he said, as if greeting a supplier who had arrived with counterfeit goods. You're trespassing. You have 60 seconds to remove yourself before our security escorts you and the police meet you at the curb. Darius turned mock pleasant. Ah, the patron saint of lost causes. You must be tired, saving the poor, saving your wife, saving those kids from the truth. Try the truth on me, Ethan replied. See if it fits. Darius lifted a paper as if reading from a stage script. 2 boys, born of an error. A mother who isn't, a father who won't ever be. That about it? Ethan didn't blink. 2 sons, a mother who chose them, a father who will fight for them. That's all. Fight? Darius's grin thinned. Against what? Public records? DNA? Your own mother who's already aligning her friends with knives? I've met Margaret Cole. She and I agree on one thing. Your house is glass. Ethan's jaw flexed, the only sign the shot had landed. Rosa took a small step nearer to Amara. Unmistakable, maternal, ready. Amara spoke before Ethan could. Darius, I'm going to say this once, so even the man you pretend to be can understand it. The court file shows you signed away parental rights. You took money then. You won't take 1 more cent now. If you contact me again, if you come near my family, if you send so much as a shadow in our direction, I will file for a restraining order before this conversation cools. He tried to laugh it off and failed. You think a piece of paper scares me? No, she said. What scares you is a woman who's not afraid of you anymore. A pair of security guards arrived, silent and ready. Darius glanced between them and Ethan, measuring, and for a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Exhaustion peered out. Then he smirked, recovered, and back toward the door. You can buy guards, he said. You can't buy the internet. Check your inbox, Mrs. Cole. I sent you and your prince a preview. The door whispered shut behind him. The lobby exhaled. Somewhere upstairs, a baby cried in the childcare room, life choosing chaos over drama. Ethan turned to Amara, apology written across his face like weather. I'm okay, she said before he could speak. It wasn't bravado, it was a decision. Rosa touched Amara's arm. We handle, she murmured. We always handle. They rode the elevator in a hush that wasn't empty. On the way up, Ethan's phone vibrated, then hers, then Rosa's, improbably. A storm of notifications bloomed. Tags, emails, a news alert with an all-caps subject line that tasted like metal. Ethan silenced his phone and met Amara's eyes. "Whatever is in there," he said, "we read it together." In the office, Lila was waiting. She'd been upstairs meeting with a client and had seen Darius arrive. She closed the door behind them, a quiet sentinel. "I'm here," she said. "Nothing else. All of it." Ethan opened his email on the wall monitor. The message sat at the top like a snake coiled in sunlight. Subject: who are they really? The body was a composite of half-truths and malice. Screenshots of clinic emails that documented the embryo transfer error. A photo of Amara at 21 leaving a campus health office. A zoomed telephoto shot of the twins at the park. The closing line pretended compassion while stropping its blade. "Transparency is love. Doesn't he deserve it?" Amara read it once, twice. The third time she found the places where fear had glued itself to fact and pried it loose. "It's sloppy," she said, voice steadying. "They think shame is a spell. It only works if we keep quiet." Ethan looked at her the way a man looks at a compass after hours lost, relief bending his shoulders. "Then we speak," he said, "on our terms." Rosa nodded, already texting the attorney whose number lived near the top of her phone. Lila pulled out a yellow pad. "We'll craft the truth," she said. "Simple, kind, unafraid. The world can't throw a stone you've already named." Amara sank into the chair and let the weight of the moment settle. Not crushing, just undeniable. The past hadn't merely knocked, it had tried the doorknob. But this was their house now, their rules. "Before we tell the world," she said softly, "we tell our sons." Ethan's breath caught. The words were both dagger and balm. "They're young," he began, and then stopped, hearing himself. "We tell them in small pieces," he corrected. "Age-true, shame-free." "Exactly," Lila said. "You write their story into their bones before the world tries to graffiti it." They spent the next hour building a plan that felt like a net. Legal calls, a media statement that told the truth without apology, a meeting with their board. Somewhere in the middle of logistics, grief brushed Amara's shoulder. Grief not for what was, but for what might have been if life had been kinder sooner. She let it pass through. When they finally stepped back into the afternoon, the sky had gone storm silver. At home, the twins barreled into them with the ferocity of relief children don't know they're feeling. Malik pressed his ear to Ethan's chest, as if checking the drum was still working. Micah slid his hand into Amara's and held on. "Story time?" he asked, solemn as a judge. "Yes," Amara said. "Story time." They went to the couch and began the first draft of a truth that would grow up with their boys. "Families are built lots of ways," she said, the words simple as bread. "Sometimes by belly, sometimes by heart. Ours is a heart family." Malik nodded, as if he'd been waiting for the summary. Micah frowned in concentration. "We picked?" he asked. "We picked," Ethan said, kissing the top of his head. "Best thing we ever did." Outside, thunder rehearsed. Inside, love did too. The past had returned wearing old clothes, louder and meaner for being late. But the house was different now. It had rooms for storms. And as evening folded itself over the roof like a blessing, Ethan and Amara understood the mercy of their vows. They were not a rescue story anymore. They were a resistance story. And together, that would be enough. The summer air was heavy, dense enough to hold sound, smell, fear. Atlanta shimmered under the kind of heat that makes glass sing. Inside the hospital, the air conditioning hummed over everything like a whispered prayer. Amara lay on the gurney, her breaths uneven, hands trembling against the white sheet. The contractions had started too early, 31 weeks. The doctors had said stress, but she knew better. Stress wasn't a trigger. It was a thief, slow and silent, that took from the body what peace tried to give back. Ethan's hand was wrapped around hers, his knuckles pale, his pulse wild. "You're okay," he said, as if saying it enough times could trick fate into agreement. "You're okay, baby. I'm here." Her lips were dry. Don't let them take her too soon." "Her?" His voice cracked. Amara managed a breathless smile. "It's a girl. I didn't tell you because I wanted to surprise you." Tears burned at the corners of his eyes. "You still find ways to undo me." The nurse appeared, brisk and kind, adjusting the IV. "Blood pressure's dropping. We need to move." The hallway blurred as the gurney wheels squealed against the tile. Monitors beeped like impatient metronomes. Ethan walked beside her, refusing to let go. The smell of antiseptic mixed with adrenaline, a metallic taste that made him think of storms. "Sir, you can't go past the double doors," the nurse said, gentle but firm. He hesitated, looking down at Amara. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile and infinite at the same time. Her fingers squeezed his once, a silent command. "Tell her," she whispered. "Tell her she's loved before she even breathes." Then the doors closed, and she was gone. Hours became elastic. Ethan sat in the waiting room, elbows on knees, hands clasped, as if in negotiation with a god he hadn't spoken to in years. Rosa sat beside him, murmuring prayers in Spanish under her breath. Every now and then she touched his shoulder, grounding him. The rain began, inevitable, heavy, a mirror to memory. Through the wide glass windows, lightning split the horizon. He remembered another storm, another night of panic and sirens, another woman in another hospital. For a terrifying moment, the timelines overlapped, and grief tried to take the wheel again. But this time, he refused. This time, he stood. He walked to the window, pressed his forehead to the cool glass, and whispered, "You don't get to take her too." Behind him, the elevator dinged and Dr. Lila Morgan stepped out, her hair damp, her eyes sharp with the knowledge of emergencies. "They're doing everything they can," she said, her voice calm but edged with the truth she didn't want to speak aloud. "Preeclampsia, severe. They may have to choose." Ethan turned, jaw clenched. "There's no choice. They both live. Do you understand me?" Lila didn't argue. She simply reached for his hand. "Then tell her that. Say it out loud. She'll hear you." In the delivery room, Amara's consciousness drifted between waves of pain and flashes of light. She saw faces she loved, faces she'd lost. Her mother's, smiling through the haze, whispering a prayer in a language of comfort. She felt warmth, then cold, then nothing at all. When sound returned, it came as Ethan's voice through the fog. "You fight, Amara. You hear me? You fight. Our daughter needs you. I need you." She wanted to answer, but her throat refused. Instead, she sent the thought out like a signal. "I'm not leaving you. Not like that." The monitor screamed once, sharp and shrill. Nurses moved fast, hands pressed, voices overlapped. Someone shouted, "BP's crashing," and the air became electric with panic. Then came the smallest sound, a cry, high and thin, cutting through the chaos like a bell ringing from underwater. A baby's cry. Amara opened her eyes just long enough to see the doctor lift a tiny bundle, wet and red and trembling, into the light. "She's early," someone said, "but she's here." Then the world tilted again, the colors drained, and everything folded into black. When she woke, the room was quiet, except for the hum of machines. The rain had stopped. Ethan sat by the bed, his head bowed, his hands still locked around hers. His eyes were swollen, but when he saw her stir, the relief that flooded them was raw and holy. "You scared me," he said, voice breaking. "You almost—" She squeezed his hand. "But I didn't." He laughed, tears spilling freely now. "No, you didn't. You didn't." "Her?" she asked weakly. His expression softened into something too deep for words. "She's tiny," he said, "but loud. The nurses said that's a good sign." "What did you name her?" Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "Grace." Amara smiled. tears sliding silently into her hair. You remembered. I never forgot. Later, they were allowed to see her, through glass, in the sterile glow of the NICU. Grace was impossibly small, wrapped in tubes and light, but her hands moved with defiance, grasping at air as though it already belonged to her. Amara pressed her palm to the glass, matching its size to the tiny outline of her daughter's. Blood didn't bring her here, she whispered. Love did. That's what she's made of. Ethan stood behind her, his arms circling her waist. Then she's got enough of it to last a lifetime. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of their child's fight, they understood what every storm in their lives had been leading to. Not destruction, but birth. Not punishment, but proof. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the horizon, washing the hospital in pink and gold. The rain had left the world cleaner, quieter. And as Grace's small chest rose and fell beneath the glow of the incubator, Amara leaned into Ethan and whispered, "She's our second beginning." He kissed her temple. "No," he said softly, watching the rise and fall of their daughter's breath. "She's the proof that love doesn't end. It multiplies." The machines hummed, steady and sure. The rain didn't return, and somewhere between blood and water, the world remembered how to breathe again. Hospitals marked time in beeps and breaths. For 3 months, that was their calendar. Morning meant rounds in the NICU. Afternoon meant skin to skin with a daughter who fit inside Ethan's palms. Night meant learning to sleep to the rhythm of machines. Grace wore a cap the size of an orange peel and waged her quiet war with the stubbornness of a sunrise. When she wrapped her entire hand around the tip of Ethan's finger, a nurse laughed softly. "That grip," she said, "belongs to a girl who will not be told no." Outside those glass walls, the world tried to tell them no in louder ways. Darius's leak birthed headlines that confused spectacle for truth. Comment sections performed their usual theater. But the statement Ethan and Amara released, plain words, no apology, traveled farther than any rumor. Our family was built by choice. Love is not less real because paperwork is complicated. Our sons are our sons. Our daughter is our miracle. We will not hide what is beautiful to us. The photo that ran alongside it, Amara's hand pressed to the incubator, Grace's palm splayed like a starfish on the other side, did more to quiet the noise than 1,000 arguments. People recognize a heartbeat when they see one. At home, the twins adjusted to a world that included waiting rooms and whisper voices. Malik named the hospital the Bubble, and Micah asked each night if the bubble would come home with them. "She will," Amara promised, tasting the future as if it were already cooking on her stove. Ethan made a ritual of walking them through the garden at dusk, pointing out the blooms that arrive only when patient, moonflowers, night jasmine, a white rose that opened while they watched. "Some things choose the dark to become themselves," he told them, and realized he was speaking to his own heart. The Grace Initiative changed too. In the conference room where crisis had first knocked, a new program took shape, Cradle and Career, pairing emergency neonatal support with job placement for mothers blindsided by early births. Rosa, who had become the building's quiet spine, organized meal trains and late-night rides. Lila hosted small circles where women said the things they had been told were unsayable. "I'm terrified. I'm angry at God. I love my baby and I miss who I was." Saying it did not break them. It built them. On the day Grace finally learned to breathe without the soft leash of oxygen, the NICU was a cathedral. The respiratory therapist lifted the tubing with a smile that looked like a benediction, and Amara cried the kind of tears that rinse bone. They dressed Grace in a cotton onesie covered in tiny magnolias and carried her out of the hospital into a sky that had saved its bluest blue for this exact hour. The twins stood on tiptoe to see. "Is she heavy?" Malik asked reverently. "Only with all the love," Ethan said, and Micah nodded as if this were a measurement he understood. The first weeks at home were an orchestra of small sounds. Grace's mouse squeak hiccups, the twins' conspiratorial giggles, the dishwasher performing its evening hymn. Sleep arrived in coins, not bills. They spent it as carefully as saints spend miracles. Some nights fear crept back, the kind that slides under doorways. When it did, Amara held Grace against her chest and whispered the story that had remade her. A woman in the rain, a man with a broken compass, two boys who chose the sound of a new last name, a daughter named for what saved them. The telling settled her, then the baby, then the house. Not all mending was silent. Ethan asked Lilat at the head of a long table and teach him how to speak to donors without flinching at the word family. He recorded a video in the Grace Initiative's playroom with crayon murals in the background. No music, no edits, just his voice and the truth. I used to build systems, he said. I still do. But the most resilient system I know is a household held together by vows. If you want to invest in something that outlasts a storm, invest in mothers. I'm not asking as a CEO, I'm asking as a father. It streamed during a luncheon and then everywhere. Checks followed, but so did letters. From nurses on night shift, from grandfathers who'd raised grandbabies, from a college student who wrote, I didn't know love could be chosen. I didn't know I was allowed to choose it. Margaret, like weather, remained herself. The first card she sent bore a scripted, congratulations, so ornate it almost hid the absence beneath. But the second carried a photo clipped from a paper, Grace's tiny hand against the glass, and three words written in a hand that shook. She is beautiful. No truce, not yet. But a door cracked where a wall had been, and sometimes that is the only miracle you are allowed this season. On a quiet Sunday, they christened Grace in the chapel Ethan had restored. The stained glass scattered magnolias across her forehead. Rosa whispered a blessing her mother had whispered over her. Lila read a psalm about valleys and tables. Ethan spoke last. Grace, he said, I once thought love was a finite lake. I was wrong. It's a spring. You came in water, you taught us blood, but what keeps us all alive is the river underneath, the one that does not stop. He dipped his finger in the font and traced a small cross on her brow. The twins applauded with solemn vigor, as if they had just witnessed excellent theater. After, the courtyard filled with ordinary holiness. Paper plates, lemonade, small children negotiating the rules of tag. Darius did not appear. The headlines, starved of scandal, moved on to fresher predators. There would be other storms. Everyone knew this without saying it. But the house on Grant Park had learned to brace and bend. Someone, Rosa probably, hung a wooden plaque by the door that read, Love multiplies. It felt less like decor and more like policy. That evening, when the last cupcake was gone and the boys were asleep and the sink was a battlefield they didn't have the strength to conquer, Amara and Ethan sat on the floor with Grace between them. The baby's eyes tracked the ceiling fan like a planet patient with its orbit. Do you ever think, Amara asked, that the quiet after a storm is louder than the storm itself? Ethan considered, then shook his head. I think it's clearer, he said, as if the world has been washed enough to admit what it always meant to say. And what did it mean to say to us? He reached for her hand and for the small bundle that had redefined every map. Keep going, they did. In the months that followed, they learned the choreography of a family of 5. The handoff at doorways, the synchronized nap, the way to laugh in whispers so as not to wake the miracle. The Grace Initiative opened a second site on the west side. A mother who had once wept in Lila's circle now ran the front desk with a smile that dared sorrow to try her again. Margaret came to the dedication and stood in the back, pearls like a memory of winter. When Amara finished speaking, their eyes met across the room. Margaret did not smile, but she did not turn away. One night in early autumn, rain returned. Not a threat, a lullaby. The house listened. The city breathed. On the piano, the hymn Amara had taught herself now had a second verse, and Ethan found the harmony without thinking. Grace stirred, sighed, and slept on. They had not arrived at perfect, they had arrived at possible. And in a world that kept insisting on endings, they kept choosing another beginning. The day they chose for the renewal was not a grand anniversary or a holiday. It was simply the day the rain returned. The first heavy drops in weeks tapped against the windows like a gentle reminder from the universe that their story had started with a storm. And storms, after all, were not meant to be feared, but remembered. The park they rented for the ceremony had changed since that first night they met beneath its trembling streetlights. The city had cleaned the sidewalks, planted new trees, and installed benches where the old pharmacy had once stood. But when Ethan and Amara stepped onto the cobblestones, hand in hand, it felt like time itself had bent in reverence. Rosa had arranged everything: magnolia garlands, white ribbons swaying like sighs, a string quartet tuning softly under the gazebo. The twins, now 5 and proudly mischievous, stood at the aisle's beginning in tiny gray suits, tossing petals that landed like snow. Baby Grace, balanced on Lila's hip, cooed as though providing her own overture. The invitation list was short but deliberate. Friends who had weathered the storms, colleagues who had believed when others had doubted, even a few journalists, the ones who had written with empathy when the headlines had turned cruel. And near the back, sitting in quiet anonymity, was Margaret Cole. Her pearls were gone, replaced by a silver brooch shaped like a dove. She didn't speak, but her presence said everything her pride never could. As Ethan watched Amara walk down the aisle once more, every cell in his body remembered why vows are promises, not performances. She moved with the calm assurance of a woman who had survived fire and learned to plant flowers in its ashes. Her dress, soft gray with a sheen like morning fog, caught the light and threw it back, strong, but not blinding. When she reached him, she smiled that same smile she'd worn in the rain years ago. Only this time, she wasn't trembling. The officiant cleared his throat and began. Today we stand not to begin something new, but to renew what has already been tested and proven by trial, by loss, and by love. Ethan took her hands, his voice low but steady. I once thought love was a lightning strike, beautiful, dangerous, and over too soon. You taught me that it's the rain that follows, quiet and faithful, seeping into the cracks, growing new things in places I thought were dead. You gave me a family, not through blood, but through choice. And every day I'll keep choosing you. Amara's eyes shimmered. And I thought love was a rescue, she said, her voice trembling just once. Something someone gives you when you've fallen too far. But you showed me it's partnership. It's weathering the seasons together, both of us building, both of us breaking, both of us beginning again. You've never tried to save me. You've stood with me while I learned to save myself. That's the love I promise back to you. The rain deepened, soft but insistent, dotting her veil and tracing the outlines of the vows they'd spoken. No one ran for cover. Instead, umbrellas bloomed like flowers, and the guests smiled through the drizzle, knowing they were witnessing a story completing its circle. When it came time to exchange rings, Ethan produced the original one, the simple, platinum band from that first wild night under the gas station awning. The one that had once symbolized desperation now gleamed with endurance. It's still imperfect, he said, slipping it back on her finger. Like us, like every real thing. Amara's ring was new, rose gold to match the one from their official wedding, but etched on the inside were words neither of them had spoken aloud before. Love chooses twice. She placed it on his hand and whispered, once in the storm, once in the calm. The officiant smiled, his voice almost lost beneath the music of the rain. You may seal it as you did before, not in panic, but in peace. Their kiss was gentle, reverent, the kind that doesn't ignite fire, but warms everything already lit. Around them applause rose, mingled with thunder that rolled across the horizon like an approving drumbeat. Grace squealed in delight. The twins began clapping out of rhythm, one missing the beat, but not the joy. And then, something quiet, something holy. Margaret rose. She walked forward, slow but steady, and stopped before them. The crowd hushed. She reached for Amara's hands first, cold fingers trembling. "You were right," she said simply. "Blood is a beginning, but this." She looked toward the children, then to Ethan. "This is legacy." Tears blurred Amara's vision. Ethan took his mother's other hand, their family closing around her like an answered prayer. For the first time in years, Margaret's eyes softened into something dangerously close to forgiveness. When the music started again, it wasn't a hymn or a ballad, but the lullaby Amara had sung the night Ethan found her. The song that had carried them through storms and sleepless nights and hospital corridors. The quartet joined in quietly, turning the simple tune into something orchestral and alive. Rosa wept openly. Lila wiped her tears without shame. Even the rain seemed to fall to the rhythm of that song. The reception that followed was less about speeches and more about gratitude. There was laughter, honest, unguarded laughter that tasted of relief. The twins danced barefoot in puddles until Rosa chased them down with towels. Grace was passed from arm to arm, her tiny fingers clutching at the world that had nearly lost her and now couldn't look away. Ethan and Amara stole a moment beneath a magnolia tree, away from the lights. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, beating on the petals like jewels. "Do you think we'll ever stop finding new ways to begin again?" she asked. "I hope not," he said, "because beginnings mean we're still alive." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then promise me one more thing," she murmured. "When the next storm comes, and it will, you'll still reach for my hand." He kissed her hair. "Always." The band struck up a final tune, soft, rising, like dawn. The guests swayed under string lights, their laughter carried on the damp night air. And as Ethan and Amara danced, the city that had once watched them break now watched them mend. The rain wrapping them in silver, the past finally quiet. Somewhere nearby, lightning flickered but did not strike. It only glowed, a pulse at the edge of the sky, reminding everyone that sometimes the heavens don't destroy, they illuminate. And beneath that forgiving sky, the Coles' second wedding ended not in thunder, but in grace. 10 years changed everything, and somehow nothing at all. Atlanta had grown upward and outward, its skyline threaded with light like constellations invented for a new century. The city still hummed with its music, traffic, ambition, late-night saxophones bleeding from rooftops. But in one quiet corner of Grant Park stood the house that had once been a refuge, then a battleground, then a home. The magnolia tree in the yard was taller now, its branches wide enough to shade the laughter of 3 children who had rewritten the meaning of family. Grace was 10 that summer, long-limbed, curious, fierce in the way only miracle children are. Her eyes carried her mother's steadiness, her father's stillness, and something uniquely her own, an understanding too deep for her years, that she had been born in a storm and raised in light. Her brothers Malik and Micah, both in high school now, had become protectors in mismatched ways. Malik, the quiet dreamer who played piano like he was trying to talk to God. Micah, the loud one, all motion and mischief, who defended anyone smaller than him with the confidence of a knight. The Grace Initiative had outgrown its first building, then its second. What began as Amara's answer to her own desperation had become a network of sanctuaries across 4 states, safe houses, child care programs, scholarships for women rebuilding lives after loss. Ethan had stepped away from the CEO's chair at Cole AI 5 years ago, his resignation letter beginning with a single line that made headlines. "Some algorithms can predict patterns. Only people can create miracles." He joined the Grace Initiative full-time as its co-director, the man who once built machines now dedicating himself to building people. They were, by all visible accounts, a success story. But the truth, the kind that never makes it into headlines, lived in their routines. The quiet arguments, the compromises, the small recalibrations of love. Success hadn't made them perfect. It had simply made them better at repairing the breaks. That morning, the anniversary of Grace's birth, Amara woke before sunrise. The house was still, except for the hum of cicadas and the whisper of the ceiling fan tracing soft circles in the dark. She slipped from bed, wrapped in Ethan's old flannel shirt, and went out to the porch where the first light was breaking. 10 years. She could still smell the antiseptic of that hospital room if she thought too hard. The metallic air, the way hope had felt like a dare. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to the dawn, because gratitude was the only language big enough for what life had become. Inside, Grace padded barefoot into the kitchen, her curls a halo of sleep. "You're up early," Amara said. "I had a dream," Grace replied, pouring cereal with the precision of someone twice her age. "I was flying over water, and there was a light underneath. I think it was the same one that made me." Amara smiled. "Maybe it was." Grace tilted her head. "You always say I came from love, but what about before love? What was there?" "Waiting," Amara said. "And faith." Grace nodded thoughtfully, storing the words like treasures. Later that day, the family gathered at the main campus of the Grace Initiative, a building once an abandoned school, now transformed into a space humming with life. The occasion was symbolic, the unveiling of the Legacy of Grace Foundation, an expansion dedicated to neonatal care and maternal mental health. It was named for the little girl who had once slept beneath glass and wires, who now stood beside her mother on stage in a yellow dress that shimmered like sunlight caught in fabric. Ethan introduced them to the crowd of donors, mothers, and alumni whose lives had been changed by the program. 10 years ago, he began, our daughter was born too soon. We were told to prepare for the worst, but she had other plans. Grace was tiny, but she was powerful, and she reminded us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. The audience quieted, the kind of silence that signals not absence, but reverence. Amara stepped to the microphone, her voice steady, her smile soft. This foundation isn't about what we built. It's about what built us. The mothers who refused to give up. The families who learned that love can be rewired, repurposed, reborn. Every brick here carries their fingerprints. And our daughter's name, Grace, isn't just hers. It belongs to every woman who walked through fire and came out holding life in her hands. When Grace spoke, she didn't need a script. "Mom says I'm made of miracles," she said, gripping the mic like it was a secret she decided to share. "But I think everyone here is too. Maybe we just forget until someone reminds us." The crowd laughed gently, some through tears. Later, after the applause and photographs, Ethan found Amara in the garden behind the building. It was the same garden she'd planted when they first opened, the one with the rose bush from their wedding and the magnolia seedling from their yard. The flowers were wild now, overgrown but beautiful, like everything they'd ever loved. "She's going to be something," Ethan said, watching Grace chase her brothers down the path. "She already is," Amara replied. He nodded. "Do you ever think about that night? The rain, the milk, the madness of it all." "All the time," she said. "It feels like it happened to someone else. And also like it happened yesterday." He smiled. "If you could go back, would you change anything?" Amara looked at him, then at their children, their improbable, miraculous children, and shook her head. "Not even the storm," she said, "especially not the storm." The light shifted, afternoon gilding the air. Grace stopped running and pointed toward the horizon where clouds were gathering. Not dark, just the kind that promise a summer rain. "Looks like the sky's remembering," she said. Ethan took Amara's hand. "Let it. That's how we got here." As the first drops began to fall, the family didn't rush inside. They stayed, laughing as the rain soaked their clothes, their hair, their history. It was the same rain that had brought them together, 10 years older now, gentler but just as insistent. And when the storm passed, leaving the air washed clean, Grace tilted her face upward and whispered, "Thank you." to the sky. The legacy she was named for wasn't written on paper or marble. It was written in every life touched by their story, in every woman who dared to believe that miracles could be man-made, mother-made, heart-made. And as the magnolia tree dripped silver in the fading light, the family that began in rain stood at the edge of a new decade, knowing that love, once chosen, never truly stops beginning again. They returned to the corner where it had all begun, not because any ceremony required it, but because some places become a pulse you revisit to be sure you're still alive. The pharmacy was long gone. In its place stood a small memorial garden the city had ceded to the Grace Initiative. A ring of benches, a climbing wall of magnolias, a bronze plaque that read simply, "Where love multiplies." Evening drifted down like soft linen. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone practiced the same 3 notes until they sounded like prayer. Amara pressed her palm to the cool metal and smiled at the way her reflection blurred there, past and present sharing one face. Ethan set a candle at the base, habit he'd never broken, and the twins, taller now, made a joke of who could coax a spark from the match first. Grace gathered dandelions from the edge of the path and handed them out like party favors. "Make a wish," she said. Ethan didn't close his eyes. He'd learned wishes weren't wishes at all, but quiet agreements with work. Still, he held the dandelion, and somewhere in his chest, a boyhood superstition untied its shoes. "Let me keep them safe," he thought. "Let me keep choosing well." A breeze slipped through the magnolia leaves. It carried the first silver pinpricks of rain. No one moved for shelter. They had outgrown fear of weather. "I used to think this corner was the worst night of my life," Ethan said softly. "Now I know it was the door." Amara threaded her fingers through his. Doors look like endings until you walk through. Traffic hummed. The city blinked. Rosa and Lila arrived with paper cups of lemonade and too many napkins, scolding the boys for pretending they didn't need jackets. A black sedan pulled to the curb. Margaret stepped out with care, no pearls, a single magnolia tucked at her collar. She greeted Amara first, always Amara first now, and touched Grace's cheek as if memorizing the slope. Forgiveness hadn't been a single moment, but a long hallway they'd walked together, one light switch at a time. They gathered on the benches, a circle imperfect and perfect, and retold the story the way families do when they want to teach children what their bones are made of. But this time the narrative bent wider. It included names beyond their own, mothers who'd slept in their cars and now ran clinics, nurses who'd stayed past shifts to hold tiny hands, donors who had come for a luncheon and stayed to stock a pantry, a man named Darius who had shown up once to sneer and again to ask for mercy, and who now stacked boxes in the warehouse on Saturdays, his sobriety coin clinking against his keys like a bell that refused to forget. "Every time we thought we'd reach the ending," Amara said, "we were just at the next beginning." That's what grace is. It keeps giving you places to start. Rain thickened into a fine, steady veil. The candle flame bowed and held. Malik, all wrist in wonder, wandered to the garden piano, a weatherproof upright the initiative had installed for anyone to play, and let his fingers find the lullaby Amara had once hummed into storm air. Micah, incapable of sitting still, taught a toddler he'd never met how to cup the dandelions so the seeds burst upward instead of into their eyes. Grace lay back on the bench and counted the first 5 stars. "Tell it again," she asked, not because she didn't know, but because children understand what adults forget. Some truths grow stronger in the retelling. Ethan did not polish his version. He spoke of a night of rain and a woman asking for milk, of a proposal that wasn't romance so much as a man throwing a rope at the sky, of yeses that were shaky at first and then steady enough to build a house. He spoke of paperwork and headlines and how shame is a spell that dissolves under light, of a daughter born too soon and a mother who refused to leave, of a vow renewed in public because sometimes redemption needs witnesses. "And then?" Grace prompted, smiling. "And then we kept going," he said. "We learned that love doesn't erase what hurt, It repurposes it. It turns wounds into windows. It multiplies. A gust lifted every white seed from the dandelions they've been holding. For a heartbeat, the garden filled with tiny floating lanterns. The children reached up as if they could catch them and keep them lit forever. The seeds rose anyway, choosing 100 new directions. "Look," Lila whispered, "a constellation you can touch." They watched until the air was only rain again. In the lull that followed, Margaret cleared her throat, the way people do before saying something they practiced in private. "I was wrong," she said, voice even, eyes wet. "I thought legacy was a name etched in stone. It isn't. It's a hand reaching back. I didn't reach. You all did. Thank you for letting me learn late." Amara took her hand. "Late still counts," she said, and meant it. They stayed until the city turned its porch lights on. When they finally stood to go, Grace slipped the spent dandelion stems into her pocket as if bones of a small miracle deserved company. Ethan locked the garden gate and glanced once more at the plaque, at their candle still stubborn in the rain. On the walk home, they decided, without saying it, to leave the windows open. The house welcomed the scent of wet pavement and magnolia, a sacrament that smelled like the first chapter and the last. They changed into dry clothes and piled on the living room rug, an untidy, holy heap. Grace fell asleep with her palm against Amara's jaw. The twins argued about whether lightning lived inside clouds or just visited, and Ethan looked around at the impossible ordinariness of it all and thought, "This is the ending I wanted, and the beginning I never dare stop wanting." If this story found you, let it remind you that storms are not verdicts, they are invitations. If a part of you is still standing in the rain, hungry for proof that love can begin again, borrow ours until you find your own. And when you do, tell it, share it, pass the rope, press the like, leave your words below, and follow along so the next person who needs a map will see the lights we're keeping on together. Because the world doesn't change when one heart is saved. It changes when a circle forms and no one is left outside. The window curtains breathed with the night. Rain gentled into hush. Somewhere in the garden, the candle finally surrendered to the dark, and the dark, having learned better, did not gloat. It held the ember. And in a house that once echoed with absence, sleep came without fear. In a sentence hung in the air like a benediction, the city itself was learning to speak. Love multiplies.